Welcome, everyone, to Ladder Daily Digest. We honor creators, and we have back with us Randy Watts as a guest. Welcome, Randy.
Thank you, Gene. It is always a pleasure to not only be a guest, but to co host with you. So I'll put my guest hat on today.
That's right. And so when we first introduced Randy to the audience about his being author of Filling Empty, and we heard a little bit about his story. And he mentioned that he worked for Disney, and we teased that we would talk about that as another episode someday. And today is the day. So
Guess we're both in kind of a zippity doo dah mood, huh?
that's right. I was thinking, of being adventurous today.
Great.
And so tell us a little bit more about how you ventured into working for Disney.
It's kind of a crazy story. This was not something that I had planned, or it was no goal for me to work for the Walt Disney Company. But my wife at the time, her and I had 4 children, and that kept us busy 24/7, obviously. And I got a little time off of work, and we decided that we would take a trip, just the two of us. And we
Almost like a second honeymoon.
kind of, yeah. As a matter of fact, it was probably more exciting than a second honeymoon because our first honeymoon was just in San Diego, which was, a 4-hour drive from Phoenix. But yeah, we decided we wanted to go to Florida, and neither one of us had been there, and that we'd check out Walt Disney World. We figured, if we loved it, then we could come back another time with the kids. But our baby was still a little young, uh, Garrett, to really enjoy the parks. So this was a kid-free vacation. So we went and got a hotel and started to drive around the area. And we just saw different signs, and one of them said casting center. And we're wondering, I wonder if that's where people go to apply for work, because the parks, when you go into Walt Disney World, the parks are hidden. You, you think you'd drive around and you'd see all these, the Magic Kingdom, Epcot Center, the Disney Studios, Animal Kingdom. You'd think you'd see all these, but the way they've made it is the hedges and the greenery and all that actually hide the parks. So we're driving around, we're not seeing the parks. We saw this cool looking building called the Casting Center, and we both had this kind of an epiphany. What if we went in and applied for work?
That's
Wouldn't
right.
that
You were
be
thinking, I would look great in a Mickey Mouse suit.
right? We thought, wouldn't that be hilarious if we just quit what we were doing in Mesa, Arizona, because that's where we lived at the time, and got work for Disney, but we didn't think that was really going to be possible. We pulled in, and there was quite a long line of people and quite a long wait because people are literally coming from around the world to work at Walt Disney World.
They're thinking they're going to get a start as a performer at Disney World mostly.
Exactly. They think I'll work for Walt Disney World, I'll be famous. Yay. So we waited in line, and I'm thinking, what is my experience? I had been a police officer in Mesa, Arizona. I had worked for the sheriff's office. Um, I went on a mission to Spain, so I spoke Spanish. So we finally, it was my time to go in and be interviewed, and I learned that they only hire part-time in the beginning, and then you work your way into a full-time position if they like what you do. So it just so happens that the man that interviewed me, his name was Jose, and I could tell that he had a slight Mexican accent. So I
You
when
wooed
I
him with
walked in, I
Espanol.
when I walked in, I said, "Do you want this interview in English or Spanish?" And he said, "Oh, you speak Spanish?" And I said, "Yeah." And we ripped a little Spanish together. Then I told him of my experience and what I'd been through and what my goals were. And, I told him that I had seen on several television shows that where Disney was featured, they had these guys in suits walking around, and they were the like detectives. I said, that's the job I want. And after about 45 minutes to an hour of conversation, he said, look, I don't normally do this. We don't hire full time, but I want to hire you full time. And I said, well, that's fantastic. And he gave me a start date, which was about a month from then. When I got out of the interview, um, I met up with my wife and I said, you're not going to believe this, but I actually got a full time job. And she said, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And she actually got a job too in the food and beverage department. So we went back, and anyone who knows me knows that I'm incredibly spontaneous and off the wall a lot of times.
That's right. We're doing this show with an hour notice.
Right. So I went back to Mesa and we announced to our family that we were going to be packing up. We put notices in for the jobs we were working and that we were moving to Florida. And by the way, I didn't have hardly 2 pennies to rub together, but we just decided we'd make it somehow. So we ended up moving to Florida and got a little apartment, and there was my wife, myself, our 4 kids, and my wife's younger sister who lived with us. So there were 7 of us in this little tiny apartment. There was 2 rooms. And so Linda and I had 1 room, and we had the baby, it was Garrett, with us in that room, and the other 4 slept in the second room. And it just so happens that my wife's little sister ended up going to the casting center as well and interviewing. And lo and behold, she got a job in what we call the zoo crew, the characters. She was hired to play um, Pluto, along with other characters that were about that size. So here we are, suddenly a Disney family.
There you go.
So, I had dreams and expectations of walking in a suit and tie, and I dressed my best to go be a detective or investigator because they're their own municipality. So it would be an investigator for the city of Bay Lake, which is Disney. And I walked in and I had no idea. First of all, I didn't even know how to park. You can't just park. You've got to know the property. And so I parked at one of the hotels and caught a bus, went in. I walked into one of the offices that I could find, and I said, I'm not sure where to go, but I work here now. And I work for the security department, and I'm a plainclothes officer. Well, they sent me to the security department, and they laughed when I said I was a plainclothes officer. They said, no, you're going to start in uniform and you can work your way up to being a detective or investigator, as they call it. And I'm like, what? They said, well, you just need to get to know the property for at least 6 months. And I went to the investigations department and he validated that. He said, yeah, you've got to work here at least 6 months getting to know the property. When you know everything about every road and every nook and cranny in this property, you can come back. So I went down to wardrobe and they dressed me up in this Mickey Mouse cop outfit. It was like a police uniform, with a white hat, and I was assigned.
No white gloves.
No, thank heavens, no white gloves. But I was assigned areas every week to get to know and to get to learn. And then um, after a few weeks, they gave me a police car, told me to get in that and do patrol, which I was familiar with how to do patrol. I think I was assigned the Magic Kingdom first, and People don't realize that Walt Disney World in Florida is about the size of the city of San Francisco. So it's enormous. Um, and 30,000 employees at the time. Now they've got more, but it's like, it's anything that could happen in a city can happen at Walt Disney World. The only difference is everything stays hush hush at Walt Disney World. No one dies on Walt Disney property, because our fire department knows that if they have if there's an accident or suicide or something like that, and there's plenty of those, they wait until they get off of property before they declare them deceased. So everything, it's the happiest place on earth. You don't want news coming out that this person died, this person killed himself, whatever. So I began my patrol, and I would patrol areas. They have huge parking lots that I may be assigned to. Um, then they may assign me on a foot patrol in the parks. At the time there was Magic Kingdom, Disney MGM Studios, it was called, and Epcot Center. I worked very hard when I was when I had a police car to patrol the property. I went areas where no one else would go. I drove roads. I got to learn every nook and cranny of that property. And then when I got off work, I would get in my private vehicle, go into Disney, and start patrolling the property. Not patrolling, but just
Exploring.
driving in all of the places, memorizing everything that I could, every street, every service area, every entrance, even into the swamps where they put all the gators and animals that crawl into the resorts.
Did you take Garrett with you so he could take a nap?
Yeah, Garrett was actually I did. I'd take my kids with me a lot of times. It was just fun to have them along with the ride. The first night that I went there, I noticed that there were flashlights blinking on and off out in the middle of nowhere. And I'm like, this is concerning. There's something going on there.
You didn't think the alligators had flashlights?
I, they have bright red glowing eyes when the lights hit them, but no flashlights. And I'm like, there shouldn't be people out there in the middle of the swamp. I was really baffled at that. We didn't have cell phones, so I drove back into reality there in the streets, and I found one of the police cars that that was patrolling, and I said, "Man, my name's Randy, and I'm in security, and there's flashlights all over at this area of the swamp." And he said, "Can you take me?" And I said, "Yeah, follow me." And I went, and there they were again. And he laughed. He said, "Those are not flashlights; those are fireflies." And I felt so stupid because I'd never seen fireflies in my life. And here they were blinking on, and moving around. And I was sure I had cracked my first case.
That's right. But were the fireflies dangerous? That's what I want to know. Do they pose a threat?
I guess there was no threat, but yeah. So, yeah. Anyway, once I had thought that I had learned the property as best I could, I just did the best job that I could because I'm a writer. And so any reports that I would write on patrol, I think that I mean, not tooting my own horn, but I think it impressed them that I could convey the information the way I did.
Would you close out your reports with, "and it ended happily ever after"?
I say these things in the name of Mickey Mouse. Amen. Uh, no, but 6 months went by, and I had a lot of great experiences in uniform. At the Disney MGM Studios, I got a kick out of it. I would, there's all the street entertainment, and they have like the car from different movies. And there's a street scene where you look down the street. It looks like you're looking down a city street because they use what they call forced perception. the buildings get smaller and smaller, eh, the distance. So it looks like you're looking about a mile down a city street when it's not. Anyway, there was a city cop car sitting there. And so I would stand by the cop car perfectly still, like I was just part of the scenery. And people would come up and they'd want to get a picture with the cop car and the cop, and they'd stand beside me. And all of a sudden I'd put my arm around them and scream. And I had a blast. I really made it fun.
That's right. What are the guards at in England? Where they're
Oh, yeah.
go?
Yeah. Scotland Yard and
Scotland Yard or whatever. Yeah. Guard in the palace, wherever the palace guards or whatever they are.
Disney probably.
I see shorts every now and then where they go out of character and they do stuff that it's funny.
Yeah, I love watching those videos.
So you
Disney probably
did that. You gave people magical moments they didn't even know they were going to experience in the Magic Kingdom.
Exactly. Oh, and the questions they'd ask cracked me up. I am not kidding you. When I was working in the Magic Kingdom, at least 10 times, someone would come up and ask what time the 3:00 parade was. And I'd say, well, used to be 2, then it was 4, but now it's 3:00.
They've settled in on that.
Yeah. And they'd never catch on that. Oh, but also,
am I on candid camera?
Right? I would think that. Also, they would come up and ask me, how do we get to Epcot Center? And my answer was always, well, unfortunately, you can't get there from here.
That's a good one.
I just
tried and true.
I just leave it at that. And they'd be, but we can't? I'm like, no, there's no way to get to Epcot Center from here. Anyway,
somewhere else.
I would have a good time, needless to say. The very first day that I was working, I went down into the cafeteria. And that was a kick in the head because I went down there and here's like Huey, Dewey, and Louie all with their heads off, eating. And they're all little people,
Eating duck soup.
Yeah, they don't serve duck at any of the restaurants at Walt Disney World for obvious reasons. They don't want kids saying
or mouse.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they don't serve mice. Also, pest control is what they call it. The pest control department, they cannot set mouse traps in any of the resorts until 2 a.m. Then they set all of the traps because Florida has a lot of critters running around. So they set all the traps at 2 a.m. and they had to be all gathered up by 5 a.m. so that no kids saw mouse traps because, they would associate that with Mickey Mouse. So same reason they don't serve duck in the restaurants. We'd have all kinds of critters that, alligators all the time were wandering onto property and getting in the swimming pools. And pest control, I'd give them a call and they'd come out with they have a big cage trap and they'd set it at the side of the pool where the stairs were. And then they'd throw marshmallows into the swimming pool to lead to the traps. And it turns out gators love marshmallows. So they'd chomp and chomp and chomp and they'd work their way up into the trap and then they'd slam it. And that gator would go wild.
I think I'm part alligator because I love marshmallows too, but I haven't been trapped yet.
We've had a lot of conversations, Gene, and I always thought there might be a little bit of gator in you.
That's right.
So I was right.
There you go.
That's okay. I have Neanderthal in me.
Was the cafeteria food good and at a good price?
The cafeteria food was great and at a very good price. I'm trying to remember. I don't think. Well, yeah, we did pay for it, but it was like very little.
Amount.
And it was the same food that they served up above in the parks. And so, yeah, it was good. 6 months to the day that I was hired, I was knocking on the door of the investigations department. I said, hey, remember me? Yeah. I know this property inside out. I speak fluent Spanish because you use it all the time at Disney. Um, I have experience. I would like to be an investigator. And he said, "Well, thank you for coming in." And went through some interviews, and lo and behold, the next week I received notification that I was Ivy number 43. Ivy 43 was my call. Ivy being investigator. Uh, and I started, now I had an unmarked car with the hidden lights and all of that. And we never carried weapons, by the way. We had the sheriff's department on call 24/7, so they could come in with weapons if needed. But that was a very rare occurrence. So my investigations was I just absolutely loved that work. I would be assigned to maybe the Magic Kingdom and the area surrounding, because it was, it's like in a city, you have to divide it up into different areas. But if there was something serious that would come down, we would, I would respond, because we'd have about three of us investigators on duty at all times.
Most of the
So,
problems were around the shops, right?
well, yeah, inside the parks, it was around the shops. We'd have counterfeiters. Shoplifting, we didn't deal a lot with, because I was assigned a Fox unit, which means I had four people who were dressed like tourists. And if I needed someone to do surveillance on some bad guys that we got word of, they would get on the tail of these bad guys and just shop around like they were tourists, and the bad guys didn't know they were being watched.
So would they have an earpiece and you would radio to them and say, "This is what they're wearing, go follow them," and whatever?
We all had invisible earpieces. I had to get the mold of my ear made, and it would be inside my ear, and then there'd just be a flesh colored cord going down to my shirt, and the microphone would come out my sleeve, so I could be kind of like Dick Tracy. I'm on my
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
But yeah, we had hidden mics, and the Fox units all had hidden mics, and they wore the earpieces too. So communication was good. Now, if a counterfeiter, let's say, or a known criminal would come into the park, and by the way, Walt Disney World was at the time the number one target for money laundering, for counterfeiting laundering. They would, print off all these $100 bills, and then they'd usually work in a team, and they'd come in and they'd buy an item for a couple of dollars, whatever the cheapest item would be in the stores, and they'd get change for their 100, and then they would collect that and they would pass it over to their accomplice who was outside the store, and he'd put it in a bag in his whatever he was carrying. So yeah, when we'd have counterfeiters come in, by the way, I also taught counterfeiting class, so I taught the cast members how to spot counterfeit bills. There's so many at the time, and still today, there's so many little secret things about the bills that counterfeiters hadn't they hadn't
Got on
perfected
to.
yet.
Mm-hmm.
Like for instance, on a $1 bill, you see all this webbing. It looks like spider webs all over. I don't know if you have ever seen that or not. What people don't know is the spider that made that spider web is also on the $1 bill. It's very well hidden. And counterfeiters, it doesn't come through on counterfeiting because it's so small. Also, they use an intaglio system of printing where it's raised above the paper, the ink, but it doesn't come off. Also, there's red and blue fibers all throughout our currency, that counterfeiters would have a difficult time recreating. They'd have to actually print the red and blue fibers, and you can literally take tweezers and pull those fibers out of the bills. But with the counterfeits, you can't feel them, you can't pull them out. Anyway, there's all these things. And so all of the shop people were trained on how to spot counterfeit dollar bills, counterfeit 20s, counter, you know, $100 bills. $1 bills is very rare that those are counterfeited because that doesn't do any good to
It'd be
anyone.
like counterfeiting pennies.
Yeah, it's like, what do you do with a dollar at Disney? But the most common were 20s, 50s, and 100s. So when when we would get a report from one of the shop people, I'd call my Fox team and tell them, here's where they are, here's what they're wearing. Go get on their tail and then let me know. So they'd get on their tail and they would document every store that they went into, and they would watch who was the accomplice. And once we knew all this information, then I'd come down and I'd have Secret Service, they'd respond, and I'd have them in the backstage area so that they were ready to make the arrest. So once I had followed the counterfeiters and my Fox crew, we all knew exactly who it was and who the accomplice was. The Fox crew would stay with the accomplice, and I'd walk up to the actual perpetrator. And, I'm wearing a suit, I'm wearing a name tag, and I just look like a friendly Disney employee. And I'd just walk by and I'd say, hey, how are you doing? You finding everything okay? Oh, yeah, we're loving this park. It's like, oh, good. I'd put my hand on their shoulder and I'd say, hey, listen, I know I'm smiling and I'm going to keep smiling. And this is going to be very quiet and very quick, but you're under arrest for
That's right. We could
counterfeiting.
do it the easy way or the hard way.
I said, if you want to take off running, you can, but there's nowhere you can go because we're on your tail. And by the way, there is nowhere they can go. Walt Disney World, like the Magic Kingdom, is on an island. The only way you can get there is by bus, by boat, or by monorail. And the monorail was the most popular route for the bad guys. So I'd say, listen, we're on your tail. There's people all over. So you just walk very quietly with me to this exit, and let's not make this difficult. Sometimes they would, sometimes they'd take off running. That's okay. I didn't care. They could run. We had people following them, and whatever mode of transportation, if they jumped on the monorail, we'd just say, hey, stop the monorail at such and such point until we get set up for the next stop. Once we had Secret Service and our patrol officers in place, then we'd say, okay, go ahead and get the monorail started again. Monorail operator was trained to say, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry we've had a slight delay. We're waiting for the train in front of us to pull out, and then we'll pull in, blah, blah, blah. And then when they'd get off the monorail, we had a welcome party for them and place them
You
under
guys
arrest.
close to 100% catching people. And would you get reports like how much counterfeit money like got through every month or anything like that?
You bet. We had FBI's top 10 most wanted. We had one of them who was a counterfeiter. They wouldn't just counterfeit currency, by the way. They would also counterfeit traveler's checks and credit cards. And one of the perps had a van in the parking lot where they made all of this stuff. They were actually manufacturing it in their van. But we never did anyone escape because there's just no escape route. Once we're on to them, we're on to them. So don't be a bad guy when you go to the Disney parks, because it's not going to pay off and you're not going to be able to outrun anybody. There's nowhere to go. That works for the Magic Kingdom. That works for all the parks. So that was fun. That was interesting. One day we received notice that Walt Disney World was going to open a brand new complex in Europe, in Paris, actually just outside of Paris. And that the top of the top were going to be called to go open that park. And, I'd only been an investigator for less than a year. So I didn't have a. I went to my superior officer and I said, "Look, I would love to go open Euro Disney." And he laughed at me. He said, "Ha, ha, Randy, you just started here. This is for people
You're
who have
still
been
wet
here."
behind the ears.
Yeah, yeah. He said, "This is for people like that have been here 20 years, you know." And I'm like, "Oh man, because I would love to do that." I said, "Just for fun, uh, can I apply?" He said, "Look, the lady that's doing all the hiring for that will tell you the same thing." I said, "What lady is that?" And he he said, "Her name's Jennifer." So I took note of that, and I found out where Jennifer's desk was. And by the way, our office buildings were all up above the Magic Kingdom's Main Street. All those buildings that you see, those are actually office buildings on the inside. So I went to Jennifer's desk, and she had seen me. We had, said hi, and in passing, she recognized me. I said, "Hi, Jennifer." She said, "Oh, hi, Randy." I said, "Boy, I'll bet you're busy selecting all these Euro Disney people, huh?" She said, "Oh, yes." I said, Mon cours recommandé à vous, tu penses, depuis déjà, no bisaban toi." You know, she's like, "Oh, you speak beautiful French." And I said, "Well, thank you. Yeah, it's something I've been very diligent in learning my French language, all my life." She said, "Oh my gosh, can you tell me some of your experience?" And I said, "Yeah, I was a police officer in Mesa, Arizona, and worked for the sheriff's department as well." And she said, "Oh boy, we could use someone like you in Europe." I said, "Well, that would be nice. I would absolutely be honored." And
You don't say. Make it
a
her
week,
idea, right?
yeah, and a week later, I got the call to that I was selected to be one of the opening team at Euro Disney. Now, the funny thing is, I didn't speak a word of French. That was a song that I learned in junior high school that was French. And I'm like, "Oh man, this is incredible." But I better start hitting the books and try to learn French in the next, because the thing is, once I got the call, I was leaving in 3 weeks. And Disney, yeah, I didn't have a passport, but Disney, you know how Disney has clout everywhere, especially in Kissimmee, Florida. So they arranged for us to get our passports the next day.
Sailed right
So,
through.
yeah, a group of us went over and collected our passports, and we were off and away to Euro Disney. I was assigned a counter-terrorist squad. So because there were a lot of terrorist threats, and
So did you buy those learn language on tape and you just played it all the time while you're in your car?
I did, and I didn't do any good whatsoever.
But luckily,
Luckily, when I got there, I was introduced to my translator who would be with me all the time. I'm thinking, yes. So, and he looked exactly like John Travolta. I I I swear when I saw him, I thought it was John Travolta. But anyway, yeah, he was my
Jean
translator.
was Jean Travolta.
Yeah, yeah, Jean-Pierre Travolta. So I had two responsibilities in Euro Disney. By the way, when I got there, it wasn't built yet. We watched it from the ground up be built, and
Oh
my
yeah, and
assignment.
tell us what you did, training and what types of meetings you would have, and you were. I mean, it was going to be built in a year or two, or how long
No,
before?
no, it was under construction, and it was going
Okay,
to be done within months.
okay,
When I say it wasn't built yet, the actual infrastructure was done.
okay.
Some of the rides were constructed, but it wasn't near ready to open up. So the meetings that we had, we were shown, you know, all the different uh, floor plans of the buildings, the property maps, where the boundaries were. We had meeting after meeting about the terrorist threats that we had received, And the first week that I was there, the only assignment I had was, once again, get to know the property. They gave me a police car. It was just the same type of vehicle. It was white, unmarked, and they gave me a nice place to stay. We were able to stay in the different resorts as they would open up. We would have a room. The first place we stayed was the first resort that was built, and they hadn't even gotten all the employees hired and stuff. It was kind of a um, we're on our own at that resort, but as time went on, we started having some of the services that made it nicer. And so I walked this property. I walked miles and miles. I looked at the fences. I looked where people could break in, where they could sneak in if that was
Looking for the
possible.
weak links.
Exactly. I was looking for anywhere that someone could enter or escape out of. And uh, there was one kind of a rock formation with a cave in it. I couldn't tell if it was part of the attraction or if it was actually a big rock. And so I walked into that cave, and here's this huge dragon laying there. And I thought, oh, okay, this is a ride. And I looked closely, and this dragon, I mean, it's huge. It was like probably 20 feet long, and it was sleeping. And there were human skeletons all over, bones, like they'd been chewed up. And I looked close because I could hear it, and it was freaking breathing. And I'm like, holy crap. And all of a sudden, this dragon just raised up and roar, and flames came out of its mouth, and it swung its head around towards me, and I about crapped my pants.
You were
I
like,
almost
dragons
had,
are real.
oh yeah, I mean, you would think because it was so realistic. The chains that were holding it down snapped. Oh my gosh, I about had a hissy fit, and I bolted out of there real quick, just in
Nearly
case
had to change
dragons
your
were real.
shorts.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, uh, the Imagineers, I'm sure they got a big kick out of that. They would do that to people who wandered into that cave. So, yeah, that was kind of fun. So, once I had learned the property, the day came that I was to meet the counter-terrorist squad that I was in charge of. And I reported to the offices, and here are these guys. There were 6 of them, and they looked like something. They were members of the French Foreign Legion. So, these guys were rough. They were pretty tough looking. They had beards, long hair. I had a guy who was an expert in knives. He could throw knives like no one. A guy who was an expert in incendiary devices, one in weaponry, one in fighting. All these guys had their specialty. And my supervisor said, Randy, get them Disney ready. Get them looking like Disney people. And he gave me a card to the cafeteria, or to the cafeterias, because there was more than one, which had no limit to it. So the first thing we did is we went to wardrobe, and the barber area that would cut hair and all that. I said, I need you to Disneyfy these guys, get their hairs cut, shave, everything. And then they'd go over to wardrobe, and they were all outfitted with suits. I think they were like blue suits with white shirts. And these guys, are kind of looking at themselves like, okay, this is a new thing. But then we started rehearsing and practicing, and they would learn that different hand signals and signs that I had if I needed them. And eventually, the park was ready to open, and came the opening day. Michael Eisner, who was, of course, the CEO of Disney, he he wanted all the first 2 days. He wanted all celebrities and dignitaries. So he paid for any celebrity you can think of. He paid for their flight, their entourage, and put them up in the different resorts that were ready to accommodate guests. I'm talking, and dignitaries. The French president, trying to remember his name, Mitterrand. Yeah, and our president, vice president, and celebrities galore, entertainers, performers, and they were to be, and some of the entertainers were designated to entertain, but entertainers nonetheless were all actors, actresses.
That's right. I can translate that to American. President Mitterrand.
Yeah, exactly. So the opening day came around and things didn't go as planned. I got a call at 4 a.m., and I answered the phone very sleepily, and they said, Randy, get in your Levi's and any shirt you have that might look like a farmer and report to the office. I'm like, okay, I learned not to ask questions. I just did it. And those of us investigators, we were all at the office with sleepy eyes. There were pitchforks and axes and picks and all these tools. They said, grab your weapon. And Randy, you get to the main entrance because we have a convoy of European farmers with hay trucks and hay bales stacked up on trailers. We had helicopters out doing surveillance, and seeing these convoys. They did not want Walt Disney World opening, so they blocked the train tracks with stacks of hay, and they were headed towards the entrance of the complex. And their intention was to block off the entrance, and they did, by the way, lit these hay bales on fire for a dramatic effect, I guess. And I'm supposed to go observe and report and blend in. I'm like, okay, so I went over there. I had a pitchfork in my hand, and there's hundreds of farmers screaming and chanting, and CNN's helicopters hovering overhead, the news people. And, I'm sitting on a hay bale, and I did not want to intermix with these guys because if they spoke to me, they'd know that I was not French. And so I stayed away from conversations, and a couple of guys would come by, whatever they would say, and I'd, give them the sign back, yay. But I had my radio, and I'd put my hand up, and I'd be reporting everything that happened. And then came the police, the Parisian police. I had Parisian police power. I was granted police power in France, but I'm one guy, and came all these tons of cop cars, and I don't know who all responded, if it was the French National Guard type people, but they came in droves, and they forced everybody away, and the cleanup was underway because the opening was about to happen.
But that was all on the news and stuff by then.
Oh yeah, I had calls from the United States saying, "Hey, we saw you on the news. You were sitting on a hay bale." I'm like, "Well, yes, I was." That was a little scary for me, to be honest. It was kind of hairy because these guys they meant business, and they were going to take care of anyone who got in their way. So, and by the way, the atmosphere in Paris was very anti-American at the time. They did not want Disney, the Yankees, coming in to open this park. They didn't want to Americanize their French culture. So we ended
don't care if you helped us during World War II anymore.
Yeah, well, there's a story about that.
The honeymoon's over.
Exactly. So we were instructed to not wear any Disney jewelry, no Disney shirts. And, we had a ton of that stuff because they were giving that stuff to us right and left. Disney anything. Um, we had to refrain from wearing that when we went into Paris, and we went into Paris frequently. And in the subways, before we were instructed in this, we'd start, people would start hassling us wearing these things. And, you know, that was a little bit hairy. But when we stopped wearing it, we just blended in. Um, we had a weekend once the park was, well, I'll get to that. But I was just going to say, we had a weekend in Belgium, me and two of my buddies. We drove into Belgium and walked around the big plaza, and there was this old man, and he had a cane. And there's thousands of people in this plaza because it's where everybody goes in the weekend. They have the bird market, the flower market, all these incredible things to see and do. And we're just looking around, and he comes walking up. He says, "Oh, you are Americans." I'm like, "Yes, we
Maybe.
are." Yeah. And he's like, "Oh, I I love to practice my English, you know." And I said, "Well, go ahead." He says, "Why do you come here?" And I said, "Well," and I figured I was safe. I was in a freaking different country. I said, "Well, we're actually here to open the Euro Disney complex." And that's all I got out of my mouth before he took this cane and raised it up and started whapping me with his walking cane. And my buddies are looking and they're actually laughing at me, but he came running at all of us trying to knock us out with his cane. And honestly, it was funny, because the guy had to be like 90 years old, 80 at least. So yeah, I took a few hits with the cane, but the scary part is we didn't want him attracting attention and having the whole, so we got right out of there. But anyway, and on one of our trips, you mentioned they forgot that we helped him. One of our trips was happened to be on June 6th, and none of us thought a thing about it when we went to Normandy. And as we're pulling in, we're seeing all these army vehicles and soldiers and huge banners. And we got out of the car, and everyone that saw us would start clapping if they recognized us as Americans. And there at D-Day, which is June 6th, they celebrate the Americans, and the people of Normandy are very, very grateful for that. So we were very warmly welcomed, and it was so nice to see this and to be so appreciated and honored.
And they want tourists to keep on coming back.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, that was kind of funny.
Yeah.
But the opening day of Euro Disney was pretty incredible because not only did I have my terrorist squad, I was also escorting. We call it escort, not bodyguarding, but different celebrities. And I remember the first night, my first celebrity was Jean-Claude Van Damme. And they had this big red carpet entrance that all the celebrities would make. And he stood up on the edge of the convertible he was riding in and jumped off, did a flip, and, landed on his feet. And I'm thinking, I'm supposed to be his bodyguard, But I introduced myself and we started walking. And, we would, it was nothing but celebrities the first night. The second night was all celebrities with the paparazzi invited. So first night, no paparazzi. Second night, celebs and paparazzi. So that was pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I'll just say right now that Randy's had lots of experience with celebrities at Disney World, and this show is less about those. But I'm not saying that you shouldn't talk more about celebrities right now for the opening day. But if people want to hear your story talking about more of those things, you can go to Megan Connor's channel, Third Verse, and her podcast is called
Disney Secrets.
Right. The episode's Disney Secrets. And so you can find more of Randy's stories over there.
Yeah. So that was an incredible experience to be part of that opening crew. And, it's one thing to escort celebrities or dignitaries in the United States, but when every guest there is some sort of celebrity or dignitary, we really had our hands full. So I had like I said, I had my counterterrorist squad was always with me, but they would stay on the sidelines. They would stay unnoticeably on the sidelines, just
They were like
waiting
your
and watching.
minions.
Yeah, really. Yeah. I mean, if I gave the signal, they knew to respond right away. We had a couple of bomb threats and uh, uh, things like that. We did have a bomb explode there, but it was they tried to blow up the generator that generated all the power for the park, but they were unsuccessful, thankfully. But it was such an incredible experience. I went home to my family and, you know, knelt down and kissed the ground. It was so nice to be home in the United States. But
How
to,
long were you in France? And did you occasionally fly back for a conjugal visit, or
no, I have an answer to that, but no, no conjugal visits. I I was there the first time for 3 months while we got everything open and running. And just when I was getting settled back home, I got a phone call saying we need you back in Europe. So I hopped on a jet and flew back to France. And this was more training the people in the security department, um, helping them understand that we don't just shoot people and kill them. That we have to be dignified, and there was a
the
lot of
Disney way?
the Disney way, yeah, and that was my second time over there. I worked a lot with the park people and the resort people, and of course there were still uh, assignments to escort certain celebrities, but like you said, that's in a different show. But that was an incredible experience, and I am so thankful for my time there. They called me into the office and they said, "We want to offer you a permanent position here in France. And if you accept, we'll fly your family here and you can work here indefinitely." I had to really think a lot about that. And I decided against it because, first of all, I didn't want to expose my kids to the political unrest that was going on there. I didn't want them being threatened at school and having to overcome that obstacle. So I politely declined and went back to work at Walt Disney World. I I always, throughout my life, I've been able to accomplish certain things, but it's never good enough for me. I want to climb up to the next level. It's like climbing a mountain, then I see a higher mountain, and I want to do that. So I decided I wanted to go into upper management with Disney, and started researching how that might be, what would be the quickest way to do it. And I decided that going into uh, the resort areas would probably be, become a resort manager. So I had a really good relationship with the general manager of the um, Grand Floridian, which is the premier hotel there at Disney, right across from the Magic Kingdom. When you see the fireworks and everything, it's being filmed from the Grand Floridian. And I had caught some bad guys for the general manager and really got him out of a bind. So he said, "If you ever need anything, you come right to me," because he was the vice president of the company. And I did. I went to him. And by the way, he's the president of Walt Disney World now at this time, George Calagridis. So I went into his office and I said, "Hey, you said if I ever need anything, I think that I'm going to leave security behind. I'd like to become a manager, a resort manager like you." And he said, "Wow, well, you would be the first one in history to go from security to resort management, but I'm going to help you out." So we lined up 13 interviews I had to go through. And when I was done with those 13 interviews, I was offered a position with Disney Resorts. They sent me to the Walt Disney University to learn resort management, hospitality, the whole hospitality industry, food and beverage, all that. And I became manager of. Well, I started in school, and that was about a 3-month program to kind of, just nothing but condensed learning. But 2 months into it, the manager of Disney's Caribbean Beach Hotel had an accident and his back was broken and he was unable to come to work for indefinitely. They didn't know for how long. So they called me up and they said, we know you've got a lot more schooling, but we feel like you're ready. We need a manager right away.
Into the fire.
Yeah. And I mean, it was like, you got to be kidding me. It was the largest non-gambling resort in the whole world, the Disney's Caribbean Beach. And so I,
Do you remember how many employees about?
I think there were about 1,200, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, I was to be the night manager to start. So I didn't even know anything about where the office was. I knew the resort, but I went to where the office was and I walked in and everybody's running around getting ready for their shift. And some people came to me and like, hey, can we get the key cabinet open? And I'm like, I don't know. What's the key cabinet? I knew nothing. But fortunately, my assistant showed up. I didn't know I had an assistant. And she helped me, she got the keys distributed and she was a huge help to me. So that was my baptism by fire into the resort management program. And it was interesting. I loved it. And then one day I got a call saying, hey, we are opening a resort even larger than the one that you're managing. We'd like you to be part of the opening team. So if you'll come to the office, you'll get boots and a hard hat, and we want you out on the building site, and we want you to be there from the ground up. And so I was very honored, and I reported to the construction office of Disney's. It's called the All-Star Resort. It's got 3 different themes. Like there's the All-Star Sports and the All-Star Entertainers and All-Star. I can't remember the third one, but it was so massive. It was going to be a more economical resort than some of the others, so that families could afford to bring their families and not have to pay quite so much. You still had all of the advantages of a Disney resort, but they just wanted to make it a little more affordable. So so I was in on that, in on the construction. We'd have meetings every morning and what we're building, and I worked with them throughout the building of the resort, and then came opening day. That was another big, incredible experience, and it was just very, very rewarding to be a part of that. And I worked there, had such a wonderful relationship with all my people. And then one day I got a knock at my door from the Peabody Hotel. There's 2 Peabody hotels. There's one in Memphis, Tennessee. There's one in Orlando, Florida. And they said, we are looking for a manager of one of our Peabody hotels here in Memphis, the one in Memphis. And if people don't recognize the name Peabody, they may recognize that it's where they do the famous duck walk, where the ducks walk from the elevators to the fountain and get in every morning. And every night they get out and walk, and they have a palace up on the top of the building. And, it's a real famous thing, and people would gather, every day to watch this. So the manager of that Memphis resort flew to Orlando and interviewed me. And he said, I want to offer you a position. And he offered me double what I was making with Disney because I wasn't making a fortune working for Walt Disney World. Everyone wanted to work there, so they didn't have to pay too much. So I thought about it, and I don't know if it was the right decision or not, but I decided that I would accept the position, and they moved to my family.
It must have felt good to be headhunted.
It did feel good, yeah. So, they gave me a room on the concierge floor. Actually, they gave me two rooms, one for Linda and I, and another one for my kids and Linda's sister. So, and they were right next to each other. And that floor, you're to get a night there, it's like $700 a night. But they moved me into the resort, and I lived there until I could find a home to actually move into. They gave me a card, which was unlimited for the restaurants, any of the restaurants. So my kids,
if it was me, it would have been 10 years later before I could afford something else.
Well, you would think that. We ate the restaurants were so fancy, and, the food was so indulgent and decadent. And I remember my little boy, Randy Tyler, we were eating, and he says, "Dad, when are we going to be able to eat like macaroni and cheese again and peanut butter sandwiches?" I said,
Why
"Well,
can't we go to McDonald's?"
yeah, right." Yeah, so I think I lived there for a month before I found a place to rent, and that started my adventure with Peabody Hotel. It only lasted 2 years because after the 2 years, I was fed up with it. I couldn't handle it anymore. I became a general man. Well, that's a whole different story. But I had a wonderful job offer to work elsewhere, and I took it.
Now, was that where you gained the most weight working at that place?
I gained the most weight working at the Peabody Hotel.
I would have gained a lot of weight, I know.
Oh, well, let me tell you, it's not just eating at the restaurants, but the chefs would send the employees down with plates of food for me and say, "Taste this, see what you think." And I always had a plate of this amazing food in front of me. And I didn't realize I was gaining so much weight, but I ended up, I saw a picture one day of myself, and I'm like, that cannot be right.
Who is that man?
Yeah, and I weighed 312 pounds at the time. No, 310 pounds at the time. And I'm like, I've got to do something. So I hired a trainer and ended up working out every morning and, doing everything I could. I took up racquetball, and every morning I was up at 5 o'clock so that I could get there to the gym and play racquetball, my weight trainer, and I ended up losing a lot of weight. I lost 112 pounds altogether.
Yeah, I was going to say, because you were mentioning that when you worked at Euro Disney, you walked and walked and walked. And that would have kept you in shape for a little while. And all of a sudden you're a hotel manager and all the best food that you can eat just about.
It was like blowing up a balloon, So, I've always had trouble keeping weight off, and I'll never be able to just eat whatever I want whenever I want. I live a keto lifestyle now to keep the weight off. I weigh 198 pounds now after 112 pounds gone, and I've fortunately been able to maintain that. I probably fluctuate up and down, but I will not. It's good I got out of resort management when I did. I'd probably be talking to you from the spirit world. I'd probably be dead.
That's right. It would have been the last resort for you.
I see what you did there.
So thanks, Randy, for telling us about your Disney adventures. We'll have you on again someday and talk about more of the famous people you met and other experiences like that. But I thought it'd be fun to get like a behind the scenes, what it was like to work for Disney and give people a taste of, the background to Disney more instead of the fancier stuff and things. And so
it was, you know what? I'm so thankful for that opportunity I had. and it'll stick with me forever, and getting employment after that was always easy when you told them that you had Walt Disney, on your resume. So yeah, it was a wonderful experience. And I really appreciate, Gene, you letting me talk about it and tell about it, because it's fun for me to, walk down memory lane.
That's right. Reminisce.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so hope everybody enjoy the show. Have a great rest of 2025. Share, like, and subscribe. Sharing is caring. Someday I'm going to figure out how to say that at the beginning, because that's supposed to be what the algorithm likes, is to have people start sharing and liking and subscribing at the very start of an episode, and then YouTube will send it to more people as a suggestion or something. But you and I can work on getting one of those. It's called like a show opening or something, and that'll be part of it probably.
Wonderful. And I hope you have a zippity doo dah day, Gene.
There you go. I'm planning on it. Bye-bye.